Hello, and welcome to Book and Lounge, the podcast that helps you discover amazing books for your next read. Before we jump in, I have a small request. Please hit the follow or subscribe button on Spotify and Apple Podcast. It helps us to grow and reach more book lovers like you. In today's episode, I'm joined by Taiwo and Katrina to talk about Small Country. Let's hear what everyone thought about the book. So, today we are talking about Small Country. I keep thinking in my head Small Island. Small Country by Gael Faye. Yeah, it's a very short book set in Burundi during the Civil War, around about the same time as the Rwandan Civil War, and it follows the life of a young boy, Gabriel, who is growing up in Burundi with his family. So he's got a French father and a Rwandan mother who has fled Rwanda because of the war in Rwanda and has settled in Burundi. And they live in this really affluent community with other expats and families who are basically well off. And basically, the novel is kind of like set in two parts. There's a part, well, not necessarily set in two parts. The novel is in kind of like two stories. There's a part where it's just coming of age book, where we follow Gabriel and his friends and the mischief that they get up to. And then there's a second bit, which is about the war that's coming, and then it comes, and then how it affects their lives. But firstly, when we meet Gabriel, he's in Paris, and we learn about his life in Paris and his longing to go back to Burundi, where he was born. So that's where
his life in exile.
Yes, yeah. So I think I'll start by just getting your views of what you thought about the novel. And Taiwo, I'm going to try and avoid spoilers today, especially if readers or listeners want to read the book. So anyway, I'll start with what you thought about the book.
Yes, I don't know why. It took me a while to get round to actually reading it, which is why I didn't join you earlier. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed just the picture of Burundi with Gabriel growing up, and I thought it was a nice because, well, certainly Rwanda. If I think about Rwanda, I think of it really under a shadow. Maybe if I went there, I wouldn't, but I do think of it like that, and Burundi a bit as well. So I thought it was very nice to just read this, what sounded like a very idyllic childhood for a lot of it. And then, of course, the way the book develops, I also liked it because it didn't shirk. I don't think it shirked too much from sort of the horrors of the genocide and the war, but it was written in a way I could cope with, if you know what I mean. It wasn't too horrific, although you still understood. That was my feeling about it anyway.
I think those aspects of the war, it seemed to be quite almost poetic in language, almost as if to say the prose was going into poetry, and there was a lot of lyricism and a lot of implied violence and the consequences of violence rather than dealing with it directly and all the horrors and traumas of it. But yes, I agree with you, Katrina. I liked very much the innocence of his childhood. I think it was enhanced by the fact that he was living a very privileged life because of the class of parents, especially his father, being dual heritage or mixed race, and the fact that the class was basically on the basis of financial wealth. So it afforded him quite a lot of luxury. And so he was entirely able to enjoy the innocence of childhood, almost living like a vagabond life and just everyone kind of just accepting he and his little gang and their little kingdom. And I really enjoyed that. Yeah, the time in his life where he was entirely free. And then he tried to maintain that freedom for as long as possible. There seemed to be almost an awareness in the character as written as a 10 or 11-year-old as if to say he was holding on to that innocence. But I guess the character is being written from the present to the past. Maybe that was it. But yeah, I enjoyed it. And it was very small, packed in a lot, covered a lot of ground, has been something that I've been interested in for a long time. The whole interweaving of the two, if you want to call them ethnic groups or tribes, and the fact that there's so much overlap between Burundi, Rwanda, and some of the other countries. I think
Congo.
Uganda, is it? Yeah,
Yeah,
Congo.
Congo. Yeah.
All around, it all seems to be centered geographically around the Great Lakes, doesn't it? So yeah, it certainly made me do a lot, well, not a lot, but it made me do some research to try and get a historical perspective and get more context. But yes, thoroughly enjoyed it.
I was apprehensive when I picked it up and saw what it was about, because I guess the subject matter is addressing the war and so on. Is quite, it was very horrifying what went on. And so when I started reading it and actually found how it's written, I found how it's written really, it's very descriptive, and it's very, because it's written from a child's view, it's very innocent. So all the horrors of war and what and everything else that was going on doesn't have quite as doesn't hit quite as hard as it would be, I guess, if it was being written from an adult's point of view. I love the innocence of the kids, and them just getting up in the morning, disappearing, and then coming back later on, smoking behind a tree here, and then the car where they used to hang out, and getting up to all sorts. I like that. I think children nowadays have lost a bit of that innocence. We are way too protective of children these days. And but yeah, it sort of reminded me of my childhood in a way, because as a young child you just used to disappear and come back and eat and then disappear and go and play again. And I like the idea that they were allowed to play and just be children. I My only, I guess, criticism of the book is that I feel that Gabriel is too old for his age. And how the character's written. I think Gabriel's too analytical for a 13-year-old. Or from a 10 to a 13-year-old is way too analytical. There's some things that's written that he's thought about and he's considering and contemplating that there's no way a 13-year-old would think like that. So I think for me that was the only, and an example of that is in the letters that he writes to his pen pal. So
Yes,
that's the
yes,
only criticism I have of the book. I mean, other than that, I really, despite the fact that it's addressing this really harrowing issue, I really enjoyed reading it. And once I started reading it, I just couldn't stop. I think I read it pretty much in a day. So yeah, really enjoyed it. Now, as I said earlier on, we meet Gabriel when he's in his 30s and he's living in Paris. And he's having problems. Oh, he's been in Paris or in France now for about 20 years, and he's still having problems settling, basically just settling as a person, as an adult. And I just wanted to explore that, and specifically this theme of home, where home is. And as Africans in the diaspora, do you ever feel at home when you leave your home country?
I mean, the reason that you left your home country and how you left. So, in short, the circumstances under which you left can really impact whether where you settle becomes home or not. Whether you feel in a position to put down roots or not. Because with Gabby, it seemed as if because he'd been living in France, hadn't he, longer than he lived in Burundi. Because
Yes,
he left Burundi at the age of about 11. Much of the story is when he's about 10, 11. And by the time at the beginning of the book, he'd been living in France for about 20 years. But it was as if he was living in a state of suspension, caught between the past and the present life. Yeah, I was looking at a review, and the reviewer really captured that whole idea of what was it he said? He said, the past is more than just memory. It's a living, breathing thing that we carry throughout our lives. So I guess how he was trying to, or maybe not trying to, how he had been, or how he hadn't been able to deal with the past in order to settle mindfully and fully into his present meant that he was kind of floating, as it were, while living in exile, and at the same time not particularly keen to go back, although eventually he decides to go back.
Is it only the reasons and the circumstances that you left that impact your or affect you whilst you're living in your newly adopted country? Is it that? Or is there also an element of how you're accepted and how you're treated when you arrive in this new country? Because there are, and we probably all get it all the time, this question of where you're from. Everyone's always asking where you're from. Even when you're born in a country, you still ask where you're from. So do you not feel that that also has an impact on you and your ability to settle in the country?
Yeah, I guess all of the above for me, anyway, all of the above. I mean, they're all factors, aren't they? But how these factors interplay and which carry more weight than others depends on the individual. I mean, all fingers aren't equal. So people that have experienced the same thing, coming from the same place, settling in the same country, are going to react differently, depending upon their character, personality, makeup, that kind of thing. But I think the fact that he was forced to leave, I think that the fact that he was forced to leave at a young age as well, that's his formative years, isn't it? So he was forced to leave under quite sudden and traumatic circumstances. And the fact that when he left, the memory of things that happened just before he left remained with him, quite traumatic things. And it's not as if to say he got to France and then he sought some kind of counseling or therapy. I mean, he just kind of was supposed to pick up his life. So he's carrying, I guess, in some ways you could call it psychic wounds or psychological wounds, which maybe unlike his sister, he's not as well equipped to deal with.
But is his sister equipped to deal with it though? Because she doesn't even want to hear anything about Burundi.
Maybe that's a coping
I
mechanism.
thought she just sort of buried it deeper, yes. I agree with everything you're saying, and I don't know if I missed it, but I'm not clear where the children went to, like to whom they went to in France, because the mother's in Rwanda, the father stayed behind. So that as well, I think, would make a big impact. But the other thing I'm thinking about what you're all saying, if you move to another country, for example, if you're a Zimbabwean and you move to South Africa, where you won't be immediately just walking down the street so obvious to everybody, are people settling, do people settle better or they don't? Because what I was thinking, obviously it's different when you've got, because of the race issue here in this country, but my family haven't been settled in one place in this terms of this country for several generations. Whereas I tend to think that people, African people, they do still have roots in particular places within their own countries more often. Whereas if you ask me, well, we're sort of Londoners, kind of, but there isn't any particular place. It doesn't make a difference to me, really, where I live. It would do if people were hostile to me, obviously, but it wouldn't make a difference otherwise. So I wondered if all those things also impact it.
So in what ways does the author convey or use Gabriel to convey the impact of war on communities and also on children in particular?
I mean, my way of seeing Gabby was that he tried to keep away from it. He knew that there was this political and civil unrest in the background, but he tried to, although at the same time, he's in a particular bubble, isn't he? Because his dad, Michel, is particularly aware of trying to shelter his children. I'm not sure whether he's trying to extend their childhood out of fatherly love or whether it's simply a case of protecting them. But he doesn't want them to talk politics. He doesn't want them to know about politics, unlike one of his friends whose father is maybe a
Professor,
professor or
Gino.
something. Yeah, who very much, talks to his son about politics, wants him to be informed, wants him to have an opinion, you know, wants him to be engaged with the society in which he's living. Part of it, I think, is the author, I felt he was using a childlike view, a child's eye perspective on war and how foolish war is, because there are times when he's trying to maybe gain an understanding and then it's being explained as if to say it's all kind of nonsense, oh, it's the size of people's noses. People that have pointy noses and people that have broad, flat noses, they dislike each other, and therefore, on that basis, that difference, obviously, it's a simplified version of emphasizing difference rather than what unites them.
It's interesting though, because it is so ridiculous, and yet it actually, in certain ways, it that's what is going on in amongst people. But also, doesn't he, the character of Gabby, he does report what the house, the cook or the gardeners, I don't know, the house servants anyway. He uses them really, doesn't he, to sort of report what he's observing.
So because the household staff were from different groups, so some have come from Congo, some native Burundians, and they're not all of the same tribes or ethnic groups. And so you see the conflict playing out between them as it is playing out in the country. And I thought that was actually really effective. That's a more effective, for me, I felt like it was a more effective way of actually showing how these things happen and how absolutely pointless it is, because these are people who were working together, they got on quite well, but because of where they came from or which ethnic groups they belonged to, there was that tension between them. But really, there was, in Gabby's eyes, there was not really any difference.
And Gabby himself, I mean, he's really trying to resist as time goes on from being drawn into one group or another and being forced to identify himself with Rwandan Tutsi, that part of his heritage. And yet he can't really escape it. And yet, just what you're saying, how people who were getting on reasonably well are forced to take sides.
And what role then do you think that his friends play in his understanding of the societal changes happening around him, the political and yeah?
To be honest, I feel that Gabby would have had they would have had a greater impact on Gabby had he engaged more with some of the views that they were taking. But then again, he would have had to probably form his own opinion. So even irrespective of the fact that his father is trying to keep him sheltered and ignorant in some ways, I don't know as if to say, it seemed as if he was trying to be willfully blind, willfully ignorant. Again, what you were saying about the fact that he seemed like an old, more mature than an 11-year-old or 10-year-old, where he's trying to hold fast to his childhood, knowing that his childhood is slipping away. Or maybe it's not that he's necessarily trying to hold fast to his childhood, but he wants things to remain as they are, and he likes the status quo. But then why wouldn't he? He has a lot of freedom. He's not vulnerable to, want, as in, he gets his meals, he gets his clothes, he goes to school, because he is of a certain socioeconomic background. It probably would have helped if his mother had helped him develop more of an identity as a Tutsi. But then again, I guess because of her being in exile, being a refugee from Rwanda, she has her own traumas and issues.
I got a feeling as if his mother was trying to run away from it all as well, because in the earlier part of the book where there's all these arguments with the husband, and you get the impression she was really hoping they would go to France and get out of it completely. So I presume if she'd been holding on to that hope, that's why she talks about her son as as being French, not Rwandan.
And just, I guess, going back to the friendship. So he's got on the street that they live on a pair of twins who are biracial as well. And then there's Gino, whose father's a professor, and then there's Aman, whose father's a diplomat. And then further down the road, you have Francis, who's a local, who's a doesn't live on the same street as them, and so his social status is much lower than theirs. And so there's this, first of all, there's this rivalry between Francis and them. And when they go to play, it's the people that live on the street who go roaming around, stealing mangoes and doing all sorts together. But then at some point, Francis joins the gang, and then things begin to change. Then, for me, I feel that is when he realized that actually there's a much bigger world out there, and there are things happening out there, and I don't want to be part of it. He consciously makes the decision that he doesn't want to be part of it, because they're getting more and more involved and more radical in their views, and he's trying to resist and trying to remain neutral and trying to remain a child. And I found that hard to believe, because I feel that Gabby, as a 11, 12-year-old, I don't feel that he would have been able to analyze and then make that decision.
I think maybe you're right in the analysing it, although the letters he writes to the girlfriend, or the pen pal, not really the girlfriend, but the pen pal, I think he's lucky he gets replies, but still, um, it should be well above the head of most pen pals of his age. However, and then he gets involved with the Greek lady and her library, really, that she has in her house. I think the way he's been, if we believe in the character, and the way he's been brought up by his father to be very protected against these rivalries and these political tensions, and then he has a chance to escape it even more, because he can go off and get his books from this lady and discuss them in a very civilized way in her garden, whereas his friend Gino and Francis, they're, I don't know, making war plans, aren't they? They're buying, they're preparing themselves for war. I think the fact that he's been so sort of sheltered by his father, and then as it turns out in the book, he's got this sort of other outlets. I think that makes it believable to an extent.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I agree with you, Katrina, because as a 11, 12-year-old, your instinct is to rebel against what your parents tell you. I think most, well, in my view anyway,
Maybe
most.
not everybody quite so early. I mean, 11 is still quite young. Some do, but I wouldn't say every child does.
I don't know. I just feel
And
that
he
he
does
he
rebel
wants.
in a way. I mean, he rebels in the sense they sneak out and they smoke and they do those sort of
But
things
that's not rebelling. His
behind
parents
the
allow him
father's
to do
back.
that. I don't feel that that's
And
rebelling
also,
because
his
his
father
parents are not
isn't.
there.
Well, his
Yes,
parents
he
are
doesn't
raising
have
him.
to rebel. His father isn't at home half the time, is he?
They're raising him, aren't they? His parents in benevolent. What's the word? Neglect.
Well, exactly. Is it benevolent or willful neglect?
Well, benevolent because they know that the houseboy and the driver and the gardener will look after them, make sure they're fed, make sure they're watered.
But the
There's always.
houseboy and the gardener go home, and then they spend the night.
That's quite a typical, I think that's quite a common experience, though, for the sort of elite children, whether they're expat or what they are, in those sort of areas, from what I've seen anyway, that, parents actually aren't very involved in them quite often, very busy with their own work or business or whatever it is. And the maid is the only person who's really around most of the while. So I think it's fairly typical.
The maid would listen to their their voice, their concerns, and whatever. In the way
No, no, feed them and leave them to it more often.
okay. But
I
remember
guess it
when.
depends. Sorry.
Go on.
No, I was just gonna say, I guess it depends on the child and and the maid, because I've heard some horror stories
Mm.
about children and maids.
But by the age of 11, I think I don't think the maids will do anything too much to them, just ignore them probably, or just give in whatever they want.
I didn't feel that Gabby lacked a spirit of rebellion, but I felt he lacked a curiosity that I would have felt a 10, 11-year-old might have. Curious beyond their own little world.
Yeah, I think I am with you there. I feel that he's very insular. Yes, he's got his friend Gino, and he does play with the other children. But I feel that he's very insular, and he thinks a lot about things, unlike the others. So then we touched a little bit about the parents and how the parents are bringing them up. But what do you think about the relationship between the parents?
They're pulling in different directions. I mean, very much Yvonne is seeking safety for various reasons, and Michelle doesn't want to go back to France for very good reasons, because it's just like you're nobody. You just go back to France, get a job, just be one of many other drones. Whereas when you're living in Burundi, you're like a small king, aren't you? You're wearing your passport as a white man. You're somebody. You're recognized. You're a big man, and I can understand why he wouldn't really want to go. But at the same time, I would have liked, well, maybe if they could try to bridge that communication blockage or barrier to try to understand each other. But obviously, that's easier said than done, because I mean, Yvonne has very good reasons for wanting to quit the whole, African continent. But at the same time, what's his name? Michel has very good reasons for not wanting to go back to France.
And there was all that whole clash of culture, well, culture or views, wasn't there? Where she believes that they'll be safer and they need to leave, whereas he, on the other hand, he's quite happy to stay because he's got all these privileges, as the white man that he is. And so when the war breaks, things begin to get bad. People like him and their dogs could just up and leave.
And their dogs.
Well,
Yes, yes, she
did she
does
not
say
say that
that.
they were, sending airplanes to come and collect the dogs?
Exactly.
Afghanistan all over again.
Exactly. Yeah. Whereas she, even with her French passport, probably would still have had problems leaving. So there was that clash, and I feel that Michel didn't really consider things from his wife's point of view. He was just very much, we're here. I'm here. I'm a big man. I'm happy. And I feel that he didn't really consider how the impact the war, first of all, fleeing Rwanda had on his wife, but also the impact of living in a different country, and a country where you're still a refugee, where there's still tensions based on the same tribal conflict that you fled. I think he just completely ignored that and failed to see that, and I feel that that then impacted on how they brought up the children for a start, and how Yvonne treated her children. Because wasn't she going around telling, well, at least uh, Gabriel, because he didn't speak Rwandese. But at the end, it's her fault, really, that he didn't learn the language.
She ridiculed his attempts, didn't she?
Yeah, yeah,
It's going to be off-putting for any child if you're not encouraged to learn a language. So you're just taking baby steps, and even those baby steps are looked down upon. But at the same time,
yeah.
there was a certain level of, what's the word? Oh, what's the word I'm looking for? Not colonial arrogance, but there certainly was an arrogance with
Mm,
There was.
yeah.
Michelle.
And Jack,
Jack, yes.
especially Jack.
But Jack is, like you say, he's old school. With Michelle, I felt it more because you sort of not excuse it, but you expect it. from Jacques. But Michel, his wife, I thought it was a very funny sentence where he said something to her and she says, "Oh, don't try being a racist now when you're just a hippie." She says something, I forget the exact phrase, but obviously he's gone out there with, those sort of young white kids in Africa views, if you know what I mean. And but he's sort of moving across into that mode of Jacques, which is sort of disappointing. I found Jacques rather funny, actually. I quite liked him in a weird way. Yeah,
Did you? I don't know. I couldn't stand him.
I felt he kind of harked back to a certain past expatriate viewpoint, the old order of things. He's not going to change because he's kind of died in the wall. And the fact that when she speaks, he might answer her, but he won't address her. He'll address her husband. So it's not just the fact that she's a woman, but it's also the fact that she's a black woman. She's beneath him for him to address her
yes,
directly.
yes. But I found it far worse coming from Michelle, who is the younger generation who's gone out there in a different spirit, and then is just moving over into that attitude because it's easier and it's simple, and you know, he's sort of corrupted by being there, I suppose. Well, I don't know. But you talk about the relationship. I feel also they both of them, they've met and been attracted to each other and got married and everything without either of them really understanding each other. I don't think she has that much understanding either.
Mm.
And by the time story is being told, they're too polarized, aren't they, to make the effort to understand, I think.
Yeah, I think I agree there. It just didn't seem like there was any way
Mm.
they can get to a common ground. And so, what impact then does that have on the children? And also the fact that they are mixed race. What do you think that how do you think that affects the children? Well, we don't really know much about Anna because she's incidental to the story, really, because not much is said about her. It's only how she
Mm.
reacts to certain incidents, and also how she's treated by her mother when she returns from Rwanda. I feel that those are the only two, I guess, times that we really hear about her.
Mm.
She's always kind of in the background, so we don't know the impact that the parents' relationship and the events that are happening have on her. But we get everything from Gabriel's view. So how do you feel then that the relationship between the parents impacted them or impacted him? Because he wanted them to stay together and he always dreamed
Mm.
that they would get back
Which
together,
is a
didn't he?
common, I think, for children whose parents have split up. I think it's very normal. And he does you get the occasional sentence that makes you realize he's taking some sort of responsibility for his sister, isn't he? Even though she's the one who's better organized than he is generally. But the sister, you're quite
Yeah.
right. I mean, we don't know what she does all day, why she doesn't play with them, if she's got any friends, if there are any children of her age or girls in the road. We don't hear any of it, do we? I don't know. I-
Yeah.
Maybe
I felt
I
that.
don't know whether you could interpret that the way he tries to live in this little bubble and not take sides and all the rest of it, whether that is partly a response to the breakup of his family, that he's trying to hold on to something from the past.
Hmm. And
And
so
the fact that Anna,
sorry, Karen Tayo.
no, I was just saying the fact that Anna goes with the mother, isn't it? And he stays with his father until the
School
three of them
holidays.
come together. Yeah.
I thought that was just like a holiday. It's not for a long period, is it?
Yeah, that was just school holidays. Yeah. Yeah, no, it was school holidays. It was summer. I think it was a long summer holiday. because she came back when they went back to school.
Okay.
And how about the relationship then that Yvonne has with her siblings? What did you think of that and how that developed?
Yeah,
Did her
it's
brother
the
go to
brother,
fight?
isn't it, who joins up, or that's not the right
Pacific.
word, but goes to fight. Pacific, yes.
Pacific. He gets married and
Do both of them not go to fight?
Yes, but eventually comes to grief. I don't know. I didn't get a big sense of her relationship with them, but obviously I mean, it's strong enough to make her, go back into fair degree of risk, really, to search and find out what has happened. And so you sort of think by her actions there was a strong bond, but I didn't take anything from. I think it's too much from Gabriel's point of view to see it, or maybe I just haven't thought about it enough.
I
wasn't
saw
she
it
getting
the
a
other
lot
way
of
around.
news? Go on, Jackie.
Sorry, I was gonna say that I thought that she was quite close to them because of how she interacted with them. Because her, I think it was her grandmother or mother who also lived in Burundi with them, and I think I thought that the bond between her and her sister and the brother who signs up, I thought that was quite strong. And the fact that she actually goes out when the war in Rwanda starts, she actually goes out there to look for them and find out what's happened to them, and does all this, goes to all those refugee centers to try and find them. I thought that she's close. They were very close as a family. At
Well,
least that's the impression that I got.
that's the impression. That's what to me is all her searching for the family is sort of evidence of that. But then on the other hand, I thought she didn't seem to mind the idea of just going off to France, which would presumably put her, you know, uh, she wouldn't be taking all of them with them. That it wasn't so strong she couldn't just, move countries and leave them to it.
Mm. Well, I guess we don't know whether or not when she got to France, then she would have tried to get them all over there. We don't know that because
That's
this is how it
possible.
normally happens. One member of the family starts, makes the journey, and then brings the rest of them over. It's kind of
Yes,
like
that's
open
very
process. Yeah,
true. But
yeah.
there's no discussion of that in the book at all, is
No,
there?
no, there isn't. But as you said earlier, and I think possibly because we're reading this from Gabriel or Gabby's point of view, so whether or not those discussions are taking place, we don't know.
Mm.
Apart from the bits that he overhears when adults are speaking. So the book is set in Bujumbura, which I guess is the capital of Burundi. So how do you feel that the setting contributes to the overall atmosphere and themes of the story? Before you answer, I thought that the description of the country was really well done. The forests, the lakes, the rivers. I just really thought I want to go there. I want to go and see it for myself from how the author has described it. So I really liked that part of it. And what do you
Yes,
guys think?
I agree with you strongly on that because, as I said at the beginning, the book, although it's Burundi, not Rwanda, but I sort of think of Burundi as having similar problems, but without the government of Rwanda, I suppose. It made it sound a much nicer place to visit. It made me quite attracted to going and having a look at it, which, I hadn't really thought of that before. I'm still not sure about Rwanda, but yes, I mean, the parts where when Gabby is with his father, when Anna is gone off with the mother on holiday, and they spend, is it New Year? They spend it in the forest with some of the pygmy Rwandan people, not Rwandan, Burundian people. That was a nice little interlude.
Although at the same time, I did wonder whether it's the whole white savior kind of, you've got this French white guy who's very much, I don't know, whether like an anthropologist that's being parachuted in to come and look at these quaint, prehistoric people or something. I don't know. Maybe I'm just being unfair that he actually does have an interest and wants to show his son some of the ways of life of certain people, that kind of thing. I felt, yes, I agree with you both that the lush flora, the mountains, the lakes, is like another character. And yeah, it did make me feel that it would be nice to go there. But at the same time, it felt as if there were clouds of civil unrest building. The whole thing with the cyclical um, flare ups of violence and turmoil in Rwanda. But it's not necessarily just in Rwanda, it kind of spills over because the peoples of Rwanda and Burundi cross over this artificial border, the
And
ethnicity,
Congo.
ethnic groups, yes. So it's kind of, they're scattered all over the place, but divided artificially by these so-called international borders. So when the powder keg is lit in one part, it takes a while before the explosion is felt in another part. But it's like you can see it coming. Like a flash of lightning, you're waiting for the roll of the thunder, which is almost inevitable. And you can almost feel it building up, building up, building up. And you're thinking in the story, are they going to leave and run away? But at the same time, you're thinking it's not that easy to just pack up and run away, pack up your life, as it were, and run away. More so that you don't know whether things are going to really explode or maybe implode or not.
But not, and also not everybody can pack up and run away because I mean, where do you go? You've got your like, what's Michelle? He's got his business. You can't just pack up and leave your business and go. People have families, people have farms, so not everybody can just has the luxury of just being able to pack everything and going. There's sometimes you are forced to go, and sometimes you in these countries you end up in IDP camps.
Not so much a luxury, though, is it? It's kind of trying to see which way the wind is blowing. Because if it's life and limb, then
Yeah.
what use is a farm or a business if you're losing your life? I'm not, I know it's more of a luxury if you have a foreign passport that enables you to go to maybe Europe, Canada, Australia, America, that kind of thing too.
Hmm.
But if it's a neighboring country where you're not, if you can't be an internally displaced person, then it's normally a neighboring country that you're fleeing to. But at the same time, that has severe consequences, doesn't it? For
It
your
does.
education and the education of your children, for the economy of your household, even if you just go to the
Psychological,
next country.
yeah, as well as
It's a really
psychological
big
issues,
step.
which we do see in the book as well, playing out in the
Mm.
book. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think although we don't see the violence, well, we don't see much of the violence firsthand. We do see a great deal of the impact that
Mm.
violence has on society, on families, and on individuals as well. I thought that was actually really well done, without necessarily showing us the gory bits that happen.
Mm.
Yeah,
Which is where with Anna as well, and the whole thing about the drawing. So where she's trying to process her own trauma, but you can see it coming out in the things that she's drawing, which very much reminded me of the kind of drawings that children in maybe refugee camps or internally displaced camps, you're asking the child to draw how they feel, and then they're drawing certain things that they've internalized. So he used Anna there very effectively, I felt.
you mentioned white savior earlier on, and whether you thought Michelle was maybe being a white savior. I think when we had the book club discussion, it wasn't Michelle that was considered or seen as the white savior. It was more the neighbor, the Greek neighbor with the books. Why did it have to be her that gave him the books? And why was it that it was this white man again coming to save this young boy? Sorry, this white woman again coming to save this young boy from the horrors of uh, African savagery by giving him books and making him more learned. So I think I got that feeling from a few people as we were discussing this as a group.
I didn't
That's
get that though.
interesting.
I
But
just felt she was
I
a Greek.
think, sorry, Taiwo, carry on.
No, you go on, go on.
No, you go.
I just felt she was a Greek expat, that's all. She's a Greek expat who loved to read, had maybe an extensive library, comes across this young boy who likes to read and nurtures him. Quite simple. And the fact that she's the one that had I think she had that black stallion or something, isn't it?
I think
No,
that was
that
someone
was
else.
somebody else. Was it Gino's
Or that's somebody else.
mother or somebody
Okay.
else? No, it wasn't Gino's mother. Someone else had the stallion.
Yeah, with someone else.
Okay.
The idea of this white savior lady with her library, but if you picked somebody else in the street who has got that equivalent library, it's possible, but it sounds less likely to me. If it was, who is it going to be that has managed to get all these books over there? It could be Ahmad's, what's his name, Armand's father. Perhaps he brings it all back on when he's doing his diplomatic journeys. Could have been, but it's very believable, I think, that this Greek lady who lives on her own, we don't know why she lives on her own, if she's a widow or what, but she has all her books.
She's a bibliophile.
Mm.
And I agree. I didn't until someone mentioned it. I hadn't actually even it hadn't even crossed my mind that she can be seen as this white savior coming to rescue this young boy from the African savagery. I'm moving on. So we know that Gail Fay is a musician. So if Small Country were to be adapted into a musical, which themes or emotions do you think would be powerfully conveyed in song? I'll start. um, so I think that Gabriel writing to his pen pal and him falling in love with his pen pal. So I think that you can he could record a little rap about that and how he's falling for her.
The civil unrest would have to be a background theme, wouldn't it? It's too big a vein not to mine the war.
Yeah, absolutely. But also emotions as well. Because if you think about it, there's a whole lot of emotion going on with Yvonne.
Mm-hmm.
There's anger, there's
Something about
disappointment.
exile. I think you would have to do something about exile.
Exile and displacement.
Yeah. Yeah.
I read a review and they were saying that a particular woman whose son was listening to Gail Fay's hip hop artistry. Oh, got an echo again. Okay, so she heard her son listening to this, and then her son introduced her to his work, and she listened to what he was saying and felt that he had a lot to say, and kind of linked up with him and said that he should write something, and as a result of that, this book came about, which I found quite fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that I guess hip hop is sort of poetry, isn't it?
Yes, poetry to music.
Yeah. Yeah. Did any of you listen to his songs?
Couple of them.
I did. I
Not
actually
yet.
really like it. And
Mm.
I'm really sad that I don't understand a word of French, so I haven't a clue what he's saying. but I actually really like them. I enjoyed them, and
I watched a couple
yeah,
of his
he's
interviews
actually on
as well.
my. Sorry,
I watched a couple of his interviews as well
in French.
in French, even though I couldn't understand it. I
Yeah, I
wasn't sure
think
whether he
he's
was
good.
promoting his book Yeah, I think it was the book that he was promoting because I think it won an award, didn't it, or something?
Recently, yeah. So he's published his second book, Jacaranda, and he won an award for it early this year. In fact, last month. Yeah. But yeah, I think he's multi-talented, and actually, I think he's a really good rapper, or at least musical artist.
I'll have to look for him on YouTube because I haven't.
Yeah, there's plenty.
I will.
He has plenty of videos there.
I found it amusing though, the whole thing with hip hop artists. It seems that whatever the language, they tend to have a very similar style in terms of how they carry themselves and, the whole hand signals and all the rest of it. I guess it all has certain meanings, but yeah, it seems quite, I don't know whether you'd use the word generic, but I mean, it kind of flows, doesn't it, when he's speaking and then the music is playing.
I think it's yeah. I think it's kind of the sort of movement that goes with the music, isn't it?
So street dance, that genre of modern dance.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so and then I guess looking at music and the story itself, there is a bit of music because they go to that. I can't remember what you call it, but that place that just sounds like this really Shabin.
Oh, yes. What do they call it?
I can't remember what they called it.
But also they have their party, don't they? That
Yes.
What, with crocodile steaks
Sorry, Taiwo, Crocodile States?
at the party?
Oh, steaks. Yes, yes,
I was
and
wondering.
the
I was wondering whether that was the crocodile that ate the tourist or killed the tourist, or whether it's just any crocodile that they have to take, retribution on.
I think that must be a thing because that happened when I was in Tanzania, that there was a fisherman who had been killed apparently by this crocodile, and they reckon they poisoned it, and it was paraded around the whole town. It was a great exciting time for us then. But yes, it seems to be something where you go and get that crocodile, even though I think it's illegal for them to have done it. But I think they gave it poisoned meat somewhere, and they reckon it's the same one. How you know you've got the right crocodile, I don't know.
and did they eat it afterwards?
I hope not, because it was poisoned, wasn't it? Yeah, maybe maybe they were looking for the unfortunate fisherman. But I'll tell you what, this is an aside. It just made me laugh so much because this little boy in my class, who would have been about 6, going on 7, came into class early in the morning when they did. Mom, Mrs., I'm world famous. So, oh, okay, how does that come about then? Apparently, because people were all taking pictures of this crocodile with, we went to look at it and everything. And he's clearly on it, and it's been on Facebook all over the world. He's world famous because he's been all over the world on Facebook. I suppose his cousins in Canada or something, But I just thought, oh, I'm world famous. So, yeah, so why is that? Oh, okay, I
World
understand.
famous,
Thanks to the crocodile.
I had journalists contacted him for an interview.
Not that I'm aware of. However, I can show you. Of course, I must keep not on Facebook. I also have a picture of the crocodile, and he is on it. So
Cool.
yes, I can make him even more famous by showing you guys one day. Sorry about
Yeah,
that.
next book club we'll have to see this world famous young boy.
Of course, he's probably he must be at least 17 now. I should think. Is it that long ago? Maybe not 7. Yeah, no, 15 probably.
I wonder if the crocodile has changed his life in any way.
I just tend to feel it's a bit like a lion when a lion kills someone and they go and kill a lion. It's not necessarily the
Yeah.
man-eating lion. It's just any lion they seem to be able to get.
Yeah.
Were there any other lighter moments in the book that made you laugh, that made you reflect?
I think the first time I laughed was when Michelle was explaining what the cause of the war or the civil unrest was, and he talked about, he tried to explain it according to the noses,
Yeah.
and when they were trying to eliminate the differences, and it was all about, no, religion, it's the same, land, they share the same land, and all these things, it's the same, it's the same, it's the same. What's the difference? Oh, it's just the noses. That was, yeah, a laugh out loud moment of the ridiculous nature of difference, and what we hold as different.
Yeah, I think for me, although it wasn't really funny, it was the bike business when they went to look for the bicycle, and the fact that they just went from place to place to place to place to try and find this. It's just such a farce. I thought it was such a farce.
Yes, I mean, you could just imagine the people, the village people. Oh yeah, it got sold to such and such over that over that hill.
Uh-huh. And then you go to that hill, and then they send you somewhere else, and then you end up back to where you started. And I thought that just really depicted village life really well.
The book as a whole it was very real, I felt. The life of both the expats, or the kids anyway, in their expat life, and the glimpses we got of the village life. The What made me laugh actually, and I know again it's sort of funny, but Jacques, his dialogues with his cook, where they're both he's so rude to the cook, and yet you could see that underneath eh, they sort of had an understanding. I don't know. I thought it was quite interesting, and like these characters, like he will die in Congo. He can't live in Belgium. He's from Belgium, was he originally? I think he was born there anyway. He was born there anyway. And so when you say about leaving, yeah, it's they're well, I suppose those people are dying out, I suppose, but it's a particular type of person, isn't it?
Mm. So what message or insight do you think the author's trying to convey through Gabby's journey?
But childhood is a foreign country.
Sorry, childhood is a foreign country or childhood in a foreign country?
No, childhood is a foreign country. How you remember it may not be how it actually was, and that trauma, I guess, can run deep and can stay with you possibly for the rest of your life, especially if you don't address it. And also, I guess I saw, when Katrina, you were mentioning the funny relationship between Jacques and his cook. Yeah, although he obviously is a certain type of expatriate, there was still a certain sense of love, even if it's a warped love, that he had for Africa. I mean, he's born there, he's going to die there. He can't imagine living anywhere else. I know he's got this fantastic life, and even he can see that Africa is changing. But still, despite all of this, French and Belgium entitlement and Jacques, but I feel he did have a love, even if it was a kind of skewed love from a position of entitlement. He did have a deep-seated love for Africa, a certain kind of Africa, his Africa from his position of privilege. But the love was there nonetheless, and that's not the case for everyone. But then again, I mean, if you're living in a privileged position, I guess there's a lot for you to love. Even if you complain about, all these Africans and the fact that, things aren't working the way they used to work when the Africans were colonialized. But yeah, it was interesting just seeing that character writ large. And also Yvonne as well. She's a particularly interesting character, the conflict within herself and the conflict she brought to her marriage, to her children, and especially the mother-daughter relationship as well, where there's stuff going on.
But do you not feel that that conflict that she has within her actually reflects the conflict that's happening without? So the conflict that's happening within the country that she's fled, that also now also come to join her in the country that she's fled to.
Well, it mirrors in some ways, doesn't it, Gabby? Because you can't run away from trauma, can you? It's going to go with you wherever you go. It's a part of you. And also this issue of memory.
It's another reminder of how awful all those events were. And, you don't know if they really are over because these things have a habit of returning. So I suppose it's important. And I think, I mean, the very beginning where he's got that bit there, as Taiwo was saying, try to explain, the father's explaining the issues in terms of people's noses. I mean, it does show, it's good to remind people of how ridiculous most of these conflicts are that we have in the world. I think it's like two parts, isn't it? Because there's all that message, but then there is this, ideal childhood story that comes through, that a few people apparently have that ideal childhood. Maybe we all have it occasionally or in bits, but he seems to have had an ongoing, and yet he didn't, did he? Because he must have been worrying about his parents' relationship and everything. The part he chooses to tell us most about, maybe just how he's escaping. No, I don't know. I'm sorry, you know what I'm like. I read the story. I don't go looking for messages unless they leap out at me.
No meaning. You don't go looking for meaning. And what is he trying to say? What is he getting at?
But you're right though,
No, I
Katrina,
read
because
and enjoy.
when you're talking about childhood and it kind of overlaps with memory, doesn't it? In terms of the memory we have of childhood, much of the time we've kind of airbrushed out the really difficult parts and we've emphasized, the idyllic parts because the difficult parts may be too painful. And you don't want to remember them and rehash them, do you, in your memory all the time?
True.
I guess what he's trying to point out, and I think Katrina, you've mentioned this, is basically the senselessness of war. And one thing that is not overtly talked about in the book is all these arbitrary borders that were drawn by the Europeans, which is what's really caused all of this, the majority of this conflict. It's not touched upon in any great detail, but for me, I felt that as I kept reading this, it was constantly on my mind that all of this war, all of these people dying, is the result of someone or some group of people sitting down and then just drawing borders and then dividing people into specific areas, which they then went on to call countries. Sorry, Katrina.
Yes, yes, but in terms of the Hutu and the Tutsi story, I think the conflicts go way back into the colonial era and the ways in which the those countries were governed. Because it's not like they've divided between, like, Tutsis here, Hutus there. They've always been very intermingled, as far as I know, and I don't know a great deal about it all. But it seems to me that the French and the Belgians managed to create a lot more conflicts for their own, sort of divide and rule processes, and because of these ideas about Caucasian looking features of the people who are supposed to be Tutsis. But from what I've read, it's all false anyway, that there's a huge overlap between the two groups over generations, that they aren't sort of really very specifically separated groups. Anyway, I don't know enough about all that, but I think it goes way back before the drawing of borders. That's all I was going to say.
I wanted to say that because of doing a bit more research, I was reading that the Berlin Conference of 1884, partition in Africa, they were talking about previously Hutu and Tutsi were not in opposition to each other. Not that they were, living a perfect existence, but they were intermingling, intermarrying, and they were mainly across, as you said, these artificial borders of what is now Rwanda and Burundi, but they were essentially one people, sharing the same language, sharing the same religion, and sharing the same land. The difference between the two of them was actually social. So the Hutus were a peasant class, 85% of the people, and then the Tutsis were supposed to be an elite class. But then when the Germans brought in the colonial system, and then after the World War, I think the First World War, it was the Belgium administrative system. Yeah, Belgians that took over. They divided the people on the basis of number of cows owned, physical differences with the whole nose thing, and then information from the church. So those three factors brought about the issue of who is a Tutsi and who is a Hutu. But before then, you could actually move from one group to the other based on acquiring more wealth and land. So a Hutu could become a Tutsi if he became rich.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. And there was a lot of intermarriage, and so it isn't. It's an artificially created thing in to a large extent.
Yeah, divide and rule, like you said. The other thing that I forgot to mention, that part where they listed the martial music or classical composer that they put on the radio, that happens in Nigeria as well. Yeah, I remember there was a time being in Nigeria as a child and hearing this martial music, and then they're saying, "Oh, there must have been a coup," and my heart just sank because I just thought, "Oh." And it was like that. They're playing it like for hours until then someone then came on to say, "We are responsible. We've taken power." You take the radio station, don't you? The TV station. Then you start taking all the different institutions and state house and all the rest of it when you seize power. It's the same thing.
Final remarks and then a score out of 5. Taiwo, listeners cannot see you.
I thought you said you were recording this.
But not
Sitting
on
on the
video.
fence. 3 out of 5. I think the voice of Gabby didn't work much of the time. Too knowledgeable. But I did enjoy the exposure that it gave me to Burundi and Rwanda, and the fact that the Tutsi and the Hutu are pretty much one people across these international artificial borders, and makes me want to understand a bit more about them.
I'd give it at least 3.5. I mean, yes, if you start boring down into it, I suppose Gabby, you could say he's not entirely believable, but I just read it and enjoyed it. I thought the descriptions of Burundi were very believable and nice, mostly, apart from obviously the war parts, but which were equally believable. I It's very sad. I mean, not the whole book, but it ends very sadly. I felt that, but yeah, no, I just thought it was interesting to read and quite a nice quick read, really. You could get the whole thing, like you said, Jackie. Once I actually settled down to it, I read it in quite a short space of time. No, I give it 3.5.
Yeah, I give it a 3.5 because I take away points because, as you've always said, Gabby's voice was not credible. He was way too mature for his age. However, I really liked his writing style. It's packed in a lot in a very small book. I like that it was very descriptive. It took me on a journey to Bujumbura and to Burundi. And it really did make me want to go and see the country myself. And although it's a story about war and the impact of war and the effects of war, I didn't feel it didn't go into the gory details, which I appreciated for it. You could tell you could tell that the war was going on, and you could feel the impact that it was having on people, and it got all of that through without having to describe all the horrible things that happened. So I think he's done that very well. Yeah, so I think overall it's a really good book, and I definitely would recommend it for anybody who wants to know more about relations between the Tutsis and Hutus, and also just find out a little bit more about Burundi. It was a nice conversation, so thank you guys so much for your time this evening, and yeah, we'll speak again next time.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye. It was very nice talking to you all.
And thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Join us next time as we discuss Beloved by Toni Morrison. Goodbye.